Hello, my name is Albert, and welcome to the first episode of Enter the Infinite, where we break down deck lists of some of our newest or favorite decks to pilot. I've decided to start this segment off showcasing what is my go-to deck to play if I find myself in a higher powered pod or just want to be a tryhard. Yennet, Cryptic Soveriegn. But before we get started, I'd like to take the time to say if you enjoy the content we're creating and would like to contribute to the production of more gameplay videos and segments like this, consider hitting the link found in the description of this video, joining our Patreon, and supporting us directly. Not only are you helping the channel grow, but you're also getting hooked up with some cool perks. Now let's get back to the episode. This legendary Sphinx creature originally appeared in the 2018 Precon Subjective Reality. According to EDH Rec, this general is the 7th most popular Esper commander, with just over 1,030 decks listed at the time of this recording. But I don't think it got its time to shine, since it was literally overshadowed by the other secondary commander, Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow, who boasts nearly 4,800 deck lists, and the face commander, Aminatou the Fate Shifter, with just over 2,500. Let's break down this commander and tell you why you may want to take another look at her. This is my personal list, and while changes can always be made or cards upgraded, I've found this to be what best suits my playstyle and have had great results playing it. So let's dig right in. First off, Yennet is a legendary Sphinx with some great evasion already built onto her, with flying, vigilance, and menace. Which is awesome, but let's talk about why we're really running her as our commander. Whenever Yennet, Cryptic Soveriegn attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If that card's converted mana cost is odd, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Otherwise, draw a card. There are a few ways you can build this commander. What I chose to go with was Odd Matters, with an extra turn sub-theme, since there are so many extra turn spells with an odd CMC. I want to get her out as soon as possible to take full advantage of her ability and to jump ahead by taking extra turns and casting big spells for free each time. What truly makes this ability so great is that it resolves once you declare Yennet as an attacker, so it doesn't even matter if Yennet gets in and deals combat damage or gets blocked. We're going to be benefiting from this, with either a big splashy spell or at the very least drawing a card. So what we need to do is get our best and more costly spells on top of our library in preparation. So let's talk about how we can do that with some of the enablers that we have in the deck to manipulate the top of our library. First, we have some of our cheaper spells: Brainstorm, Ponder, and Portent. These are just some of the instants and sorceries that allow us to set up the top of our decks and clear the way by drawing some of the cards we don't want on top. Brainstorm allows us to draw 3 cards and put 2 cards back on top of our library in any order, which is so important to our game plan, because you will definitely have some big expensive cards in your hand at any given point. So rather than wait till the late game to cast them, let's put them right back on top of our library. Ponder and Portent both allow us to look at the top 3 cards of our deck, put them back in any order, and draw a card. The only difference being that Ponder allows you to draw a card that turn, and Portent allows you to draw a card at the beginning of the next player's upkeep. Next, we have the package of Sensei's Divining Top, Scroll Rack, and Soothsaying. These 3 cards are some of the best cards you can have on the field. They will continuously allow you to manipulate the top of your deck and make sure you find those good hits. Sensei's Top allows us to keep rearranging the top 3 cards of our deck for just 1 mana, and it also protects itself from artifact removal. But let's say we have those big expensive spells in our hand. That's where Scroll Rack comes in. Scroll Rack allows us to exile any number of cards from our hand and exchange them with that many cards from the top of our library, while also putting them in any order we choose. This is the best way of being able to get those big mana spells that may be stuck in our hand back in the deck. Since we're going to be playing our spells for free, Soothsaying allows us to use some of that unspent mana to set up our spells the way we want. What's also great about this card is in the late game, it can be a mana sink to finding one of our game-ending spells, but we'll touch on that a little later. It also has the ability of paying 5 to shuffle your library, but most of the time, if you're going to pay 5, you might as well pay 5 into the X and try to find something on the top of your deck. The only Planeswalker I'm running is Aminatou. which is a great planeswalker to have out on the field since her +1 ability does exactly what we need it to do, manipulating the top of our deck, but also does not pose an immediate threat to the table, since that's normally all we want to do with her. But in the event that we have nothing else going on for us, and can manage to get her to ultimate, we can choose to flip the game on its head and switch everyone's board states. While I've never actually done this myself, since we're normally ahead of the table after 3 activations, it's sort of the last line of defense for the deck. Next we have some of our value creatures. Let's start off with our Praetors, Elesh Norn and Sheoldred. If you manage to hit Elesh Norn off the top of your deck, she comes down and shrinks your opponent's creatures and pumps ours, which will happen before blockers can even be declared. So let's say your opponent has several 1/1 chump blockers in the air for Yennet. This helps clear the way to get some damage in. Sheoldred is another Praetor that just comes down and needs to be dealt with immediately, allowing us to return a target creature from our graveyard to the battlefield each upkeep and making our opponent sacrifice a creature each upkeep. It really is one of those creatures that just demands removal, and when your opponents are using removal spells on Sheoldred, that's one less for your commander. That is one strategy we are playing in this deck, Graveyard Recursion, and playing our opponent's cards. Sepulchral Primordial also does that for us, allowing us to grab the best creature from each of our opponent's graveyards and put them onto the battlefield under our control. If nothing is in the graveyard yet, let's just use the Agent of Treachery to steal the best creature on the board, and since we can easily have 3 or more permanents that belong to our opponents, don't forget the second part of the card, which allows us to draw 3 cards. The Primordial and the Agent of Treachery are also really good targets for Amanatu's -1 ability, exiling them and returning them to the battlefield under our control, triggering their Enter the Battlefield ability again. Doom Whisperer does a lot of work in this deck. Not only is he a big body, but he himself also allows us to filter through our top decks by paying 2 life and surveilling 2. This helps us clear any lands or unwanted spells off the top of our deck when we go to attack. Thief of Sanity is one of our only low-cost creatures in the deck, so if we draw him early, we can just start exiling cards from our opponent's decks to play later in the game. If nothing else, he can also turn into a lightning rod for your opponent's removal because nobody wants to be exiling cards that early in the game. But the real power of the deck comes from our Eldrazi package. If Praetors weren't annoying enough to have to deal with, let's add the biggest baddies in the multiverse. Void Winnower comes down and truly turns the table on its head, not allowing your opponents to cast even-costed spells, and unable to block with even-costed creatures. This normally elicits some groans from the table, seeing as more often than not, someone will be sitting with an answer for it, but can't cast it since it's an even CMC. Ulamog comes down and destroys any problematic permanent, and then starts annihilating your opponent's boards with each attack. In one game we showcased this season, it literally ate up one player's board turn after turn until he was no longer a threat. The other upside to this card is if you happen to get it milled, countered, or have to sack it, he allows you to shuffle your graveyard into your library, which will give you even more chances to hit your extra turn spells or any value creatures that may have been destroyed. Then we have Emrakul, the flying, trampling spaghetti monster with protection from instants. Oh, and if we can't take any extra turns ourselves, how about we just cast her and take our opponent's next turn? Sure, they get a turn right after, but by the time we're done wrecking their board and playing all their best spells, they normally have to spend it slowly rebuilding. In this section, we'll discuss some of the best payoff spells, whether we are casting them for free or playing them later in the game. These cards come down and give us a ton of value. Mind's Dilation and Diluvian Primordial. Let's just say we aren't having any fun playing our own deck for free. Let's spice it up and just play our opponent's deck instead. Mind's Dilation allows us to exile the top card of our opponent's library and cast it for free each time they play their first spell each turn. Just the amount of value you can accumulate in one turn could be backbreaking to your opponents. Then we have Diluvian Primordial, who enters the battlefield and allows us to cast your opponent's best spells from their graveyard, for you guessed it, free. This is another great target for Amanatu's minus ability. We can blink this creature and keep playing our opponent's spells. And since we're an Esper, we can always use some of those ramp spells the green decks all seem to be running. So doing this can be very valuable if we find ourselves in the late game with big uncastable bombs in our hand. As far as our instants and sorceries go, we have Rise of the Dark Realms, Blatant Thievery, and Approach of the Second Sun. Any one of these cards can win us the game, or at least swing the game in our favor. Rise lets us reanimate everyone's graveyard under our control. Blatant Thievery allows us to just steal the best permanent from each of our opponents. And Approach of the Second Sun is an easy win con, that I find myself slotting in and out of the deck from time to time. Sometimes you want to end the game fast and easy, but most of the time it's just slow and painful. And if we have Soothsaying on the battlefield with enough mana, we can just get this back to the top of our deck to either draw it or set it up to cast for free with Yennet's ability. Our board wipe package includes Garruk's Wake, Plague Wind, Time Wipe, and Tragic Arrogance. Each one of these board wipes protects us from losing our commander and having to recast her in one way or another. Garruk's Wake and Plague Wind are similar in the fact that they destroy all the creatures our opponents control. Just Garruk's Wake takes it one step further and also destroys their planeswalkers. Time Wipe is for the situations where we find ourselves behind. It destroys all creatures on the field, but allows us to bounce a creature we control to our hand. This will be our commander a majority of the time and keep us from having to pay the commander tax, which can be very valuable if our commander has already been sent to the command zone a few times. Tragic Arrogance allows us to choose an artifact, creature, enchantment, and planeswalker from each player, and all other non-land permanents get sacrificed, letting us keep the best permanents on our board and leaving our opponent's boards decimated. And even though we can't cast it off the top with Yennet, we are running Cyclonic Rift, because it's Cyclonic Rift. You run it if you have it. It's too good not to. Now that we've gone over some of the more fair cards we're playing, let's move to my favorite part of the deck, the Extra Turns package. Time Warp is a pretty simple card. For 3 and 2 blue, we get a sorcery that allows us to take an extra turn after this one. This one does read target player takes an extra turn, but we're always going to be selfish and take those turns for ourselves. Temporal Mastery is costed a bit more with a casting cost of 7, but can be played much earlier for its miracle cost of 1 and a blue if it's the first card you've drawn that turn and revealed it. Nexus of Fate, in my opinion, is tied for the best extra turn spell found in the deck. The fact that its instant speed is a bonus, but what really matters here is that it's repeatable, since it shuffles itself right back into your library anytime it hits the graveyard. I've even had games where I had so much mana to be able to dump into a Soothsaying and find this card repeatedly to lock out the table. Of course that took me stealing someone's Nyxbloom Ancient, but hey, it can happen. Expropriate is the other best extra turn spell in the deck. And do I really need to say why? First, we're guaranteed to get at least 1 vote for time from ourselves, but up to 4 sounds amazing. Of course, we won't always get our opponents to all vote time, but that's okay. Let's just staple Blatant Thievery on the card. Being able to steal 3 of the best permanents from our opponents is not a downside. And remember, we don't care the CMC because we're not paying for it. Once this spell resolves, sure, it exiles itself, but that's totally fine because by then we'll be so far ahead we should be close to finishing our opponents off. Alrund's Epiphany is just another expensive extra turn spell that gives us a couple 1/1 birds and can be foretold. Temporal Trespass is a ridiculously costed spell, but has the benefit of having Delve. So even if this is in our hand and we have a graveyard full of fetches or other cards we no longer need, we can play this for as low as 3 blue mana. Demonic Deluge is our honorary extra turn spell. This card is great because you hardly see it played. It's currently listed in very few decks on EDH Rec, and only 85 of them being Yennet lists. This card can come down to give us 3 additional copies of one of our extra turn spells in our graveyard. You can also target something like Blatant Thievery 3 times, and just propel yourself into the lead, or further into the lead. Another way we can find exactly what we want to hit with Yennet's ability is to tutor that exact card to the top of our deck. This is why we run Vampiric Tutor over Demonic Tutor in the deck, since it puts whatever card we need or want at the top of our library instead of our hand. Mystical Tutor also does this for us, but can only find instants and sorceries. This can be one of our extra turn spells, or if we need to get rid of a problematic board state, one of our one-sided board wipes. Conduit of Ruin is our most expensive, even costed spell in our deck, but the reason it's in here is it finds any one of our Eldrazi's and puts it on top of the deck for Yennet's attack trigger, which is amazing. Vargoth is a powerhouse in the deck, since we can pay 2 to boast and just tutor anything we need to the top of our library, and it's repeatable as long as he stays alive. That's not always the case, but since we can hold priority with Yennet's trigger on the stack, we can definitely clear the way for our attackers by board wiping before our opponents have a chance to block him. Tribute Mage is in here to search up some of our 2-cost artifacts, but there's only 2 that we really need, and that's Scroll Rack and Lightning Greaves, which leads us into our next topic. Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, and Whispersilk Cloak are all essential to having our commander stick around to pull off our game plan. Once the table figures out that Yennet is a problem, she won't stick around. So we definitely want to have her well protected. But not only do we want her protected, the boots and greaves give her haste to have her attacking, hopefully, the turn she comes out. One more artifact I wanted to showcase in the deck is Lithoform Engine. It does exactly everything. Since we're trying to play everything off the top of our deck for free, we'll have a ton of mana open to activate the engine to copy our extra turn spells or Blatant Thievery, copy any of our value creatures such as Agent of Treachery or one of the Primordials, or just copy our combat trigger. It's our Swiss Army knife, and every Yennet deck should have one. We really want to get our commander out as soon as possible, so fast mana rocks like Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus are in there, as well as the usual suspects: Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Commander Sphere, and Darksteel Ingot. We have to run some counters to protect our commander. We can't just sit back and hope she makes it to our next turn in order to use her, so we run the top counters in the format like Fierce Guardianship, Force of Will, and Mana Drain in the deck. Again, our game plan revolves around Yennet sticking around in order to get the payoff from her attack trigger, so we want to try and counter whatever removal gets thrown at her early on. She will definitely be a target as soon as she hits the board, so being able to counter something for free is crucial when we've just tapped out to cast her. We also have a couple Teferi spells. Teferi, Mage's Alfear, keeps our opponents from interrupting us on our turn, and if we're taking multiple extra turns, then we may just be free to do whatever we please without fear of having our spells countered or creatures removed at instant speed. Teferi's protection allows us to keep our board state intact and can even save us for a turn from someone activating Homeward Path in order to make us give back all those creatures we have worked so hard to steal. We run a total of 37 lands in the deck. Of course, we're running fetches and shocks for the mana fixing, Ancient Tomb to rush our commander out, and Command Beacon to get her back in our hand if she gets too expensive. But some of the utility lands we're running include the Scry lands. I know we want our commander out as soon as possible, and having tap lands in the deck can hinder us, but the Scry can actually help us greatly later in the game when we have our commander on the field. Halimar Depths is even better, letting us dig 3 cards deep and rearrange them in any order we choose. Well, there you have it. Yennet is one of those sneaky commanders you don't see very often. I've played tons of games in my local scene and at multiple command fests, and have only run into a handful of people playing her. She is very powerful and can be tough to deal with, so you may want to take another look at her. If you're interested in the deck and want to see the complete list, check out the link listed in the description below. If you want to see how it plays out, I have also added links for every game Yennet was played on Season 1. Well, I hope you enjoyed our first episode of Enter the Infinite. Make sure you drop us a like and comment. Let me know what commanders from Season 1 you would like to see featured on future episodes. As I mentioned before, we now have a Patreon. We have quite a few projects in the works right now, and if you would like to help us in the production of all our future content, consider becoming a patron like the fine people listed on the screen. We currently have monthly patron giveaways, which feature sealed secret layers as a token of our appreciation. So head on over to patreon.com/InResponseEDH and join the crew. We here at In Response would like to thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow us on our social medias. We also stream every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.